Hey everybody, welcome to Starting Line Church. Happy Easter. We are so glad that you have joined us today as we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Today on Easter, we get to celebrate that Jesus didn't stay in the grave after dying on the cross, but that he rose to life and is alive today. So today is a celebration that gives us freedom, a celebration that brings us hope for the future, and a celebration that brings us victory. And we're going to celebrate really big here at Starting Line Church today. And our prayer for you is that when you enter into this time today, that you would get to celebrate Jesus' resurrection and what it means for your life. But that it isn't just about one day or reserved for one day a year, but that you would walk in the transforming power of the resurrection each and every day as it begins to transform your life. That's our prayer for you as we begin today. As we begin, I'd love for you to think about some of your favorite Easter memories. Liz just shared one earlier with you about Easter eggs and decorating them and family time, and that's super special. Maybe they're centered around family and friends for you. Maybe they're around egg hunts and candy and the Easter bunny. Maybe they have to do with food or traditions. Maybe it's something really different or really unique. Like you, I have some favorite Easter memories, and they are moments that I'll never forget. But like those Easter memories, I also have moments in life, too, that I'll never forget. I would probably guess that you do, too. They might be joyous and fun and exciting and moments that we want to go back to and remember. But they also might be painful memories and painful moments that you wish you could forget. Today, we're going to dive into the story of the resurrection of Jesus in the book of John. And specifically, we're going to be looking through the lens of a man named Peter, otherwise known as Simon Peter. Peter was one of Jesus' disciples, one of his original 12 disciples that traveled with him, that lived life with him, that observed him, that did ministry with Jesus for about 3 years. And even in this group of 12, Peter was one of the closest in relationship to Christ. Now, Peter was a very loyal and passionate disciple. But he was also known to be rash and a bit careless when it came to his words and his actions. We see these qualities in so many places in Peter's life and stories in the Bible. And in the midst of both his great attributes and great things and his not so great ones, Jesus loved Peter. And he believed in Peter. But because of his rashness and anger that would sometimes rear its head in Peter's life, he got into some trouble. And we'll see today, in our story today, that Peter also had one of these moments where it feels like he'll never forget it, and probably wishes he did. We learn that the night that Jesus was betrayed and arrested by the religious leaders who were falsely accusing him, he has his last meal with his disciples. And at that meal, Jesus tells Peter that from then until morning, Peter was going to deny knowing Jesus 3 different times. And Peter's shocked. He's completely appalled by the accusation, and he doesn't believe him at all. Because he would never do that to his Lord. Well, the night goes on, and Jesus is arrested, and he's beaten, and he's under trial, for which he didn't defend himself, because he knew God's plan for him was to sacrifice himself to save the world. And that is where we pick up reading. Caught you up to speed. That's where we pick up reading in John chapter 18, starting in verse 25. Peter finds himself here with a group of people standing around a charcoal fire in the midst of all this uncertainty and all this fear and all this chaos with what's going on with Jesus. This is what it says. Meanwhile, as Simon Peter was standing by the fire warming himself, they asked him again, "You're not one of his disciples, are you?" He denied it, saying, No, I'm not." But one of the household slaves of the high priest, a relative of the man whose ear Peter had just cut off, asked, "Didn't I see you out there in the olive grove with Jesus?" Again, for a third time, Peter denied it, and immediately a rooster crowed. What loyal and devoted Peter never believed would happen just did. Just as Jesus said it would, he denied that he was a follower of Christ and that he even knew Jesus at all. I don't know about you, but I can't imagine what Peter was facing in this moment and feeling in this moment: shame, failure, heartbreak, disloyalty. And with the memory of being around this fire, the smell of smoke, the flames, the orange flames in his vision, those things would forever be associated with this terrible moment in time. And it was a memory that I'm assuming Peter wanted to forget and wanted to do over. From that moment on, Jesus goes to die on the cross without a fight because of his love for humanity, because he knew it was the plan to save us. And not only did Peter have to watch all of that take place, but he had to watch it take place and live with the guilt of what just happened earlier. We're going to pick up reading a little later in our story. We're going to jump down to John chapter 20, verse 1. This is what it says. Early on Sunday morning, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and found that the stone had been rolled away from the entrance. She ran and found Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved. She said, "They have taken the Lord's body out of the tomb, and we don't know where he's gone." Peter and the other disciple started out for the tomb. They were both running, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He stooped and looked in and saw the linen wrapping lying there, but he didn't go in. Then Simon Peter arrived and went inside. He noticed the linen wrappings lying there, while the cloth had covered Jesus' head was folded up and lying apart from the other wrappings. Then the disciple who had reached the tomb first also went in, and he saw, and he believed. For until then, he didn't understand the scriptures that said Jesus was going to rise from the dead. So 3 days go by, and all of a sudden, all this sorrow and all this pain from the crucifixion of Jesus days earlier is slowly beginning to shift. Jesus is alive. The tomb is empty. Mary Magdalene and some of the other women, they go and they find the empty tomb. And in other accounts of this story in the Bible, it says that they were met by two angels who told them that Jesus wasn't there because he had risen from the dead. He was alive. And so they leave and they go tell the disciples, as we read in here, what's going on. They're the first messengers to share the greatest news in human history, that death has been defeated. But in this excitement, they're still confused as to what's happening. They don't understand what's going on. Who wouldn't be, right? And the disciples, they don't really believe them. They don't really believe what they're saying. And so the women go to the tomb with disciples, one of them being Peter, and they find that the garments that Jesus was wrapped in were still there. It couldn't have been thieves who took Jesus, right? No one would come to steal the body, would actually take the time to unwrap the linen and neatly fold it back behind in this little pile. It was clearly that Jesus got up by his own initiative, by his divine power, and that he enjoys neatly folding laundry, unlike me. It's in this moment that Peter believes Jesus is alive. Some time goes by and Jesus appears to the other disciples, and it is confirmed that he is alive, that the miracle just happened, that he rose from the dead. Jumping down to John chapter 21. Starting at verse 4, the disciples, they're out fishing on the Sea of Galilee where they spend a lot of their time. They know that Jesus is alive. They've seen him. And it says that there were several of them there on this particular day. Thomas, Nathanael, the sons of Zebedee, two others, And you guessed it, Peter. At dawn, when there wasn't much daylight, Jesus meets them. John chapter 21, starting at verse 4. At dawn, Jesus was standing on the beach, but the disciples couldn't see who he was. He called out, "Fellows, have you caught any fish?" "No," they replied. Then he said, "Throw out your net on the right-hand side of the boat, and you'll get some." So they did, and they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. Then the disciple Jesus loved, said to Peter, "It's the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on his tunic, jumped into the water, and headed to shore. The others stayed with the boat and pulled the loaded net to the shore, for they were only about 100 yards from the shore. When they got there, they found breakfast waiting for him, fish cooking over a charcoal fire, and some bread. Loyal and excitable Peter sees Jesus and he beelines for him. He's so excited to see him that he hops off the boat, he jumps into the water, he takes off through the sand and heads to the shore to meet his Lord. But when he gets there, he finds his Savior around a familiar scene. A charcoal fire, cooking fish. If you remember, it was around a charcoal fire that Peter denied Jesus 3 times. A memory that would be a hard one to forget. Can you imagine Peter as he gets closer and closer to shore? He starts to smell the smoke from the fire. He starts to see the flames get brighter and brighter. He starts to feel the warmth from coming off the ocean, the warmth from the fire. And as he gets closer and closer, all of these things are happening, and the painful memory of denying Jesus not too long before this is all rushing back. And all the negative emotions are coming back, are flooding to his mind as he experiences this moment with the fire yet again. But out of the goodness and mercy of Jesus, he flips the script. And without saying one word, what him around that fire communicates is, "Peter, I know what you've done. I know what happened. And I know you feel shame and you feel guilt. And I know this moment has to be hard for you to experience, but I'm changing the memory." Because of Christ's resurrection, painful moments can be redeemed. Redeemed means to buy back, to exchange one thing for another, to make up for something or to make something good that was previously bad. Right? A financial example would be paying off a car loan. A practical example would be when a bad acting movie has a really good ending and it's all worth it. In this moment, Jesus is changing the memory that Peter associated with his failure to the moment where he was redeemed. His most life-altering and heartbreaking moment was around a fire. And Jesus takes him to the exact memory, to the exact moment, and to the exact image that Peter associated with his shame and his failure and his pain, and he says, "No more." Jesus says, "I died for your sin. I rose from the grave so that you don't have to live with that shame and that brokenness anymore. I came to redeem you and restore you and make all things new, even the darkest of times." Jesus desperately wanted Peter to not just hear that he was redeemed. He didn't want Peter just to know that he was redeemed. He wanted him to experience redemption in the very depths of his soul. That fire that Peter associated with the worst moment of his life is now a symbol of Christ's resurrection, redeeming Peter. Where Jesus had every justified reason to be upset with Peter for not standing up for him, for not staying by his side, for betraying him, he instead grants him this beautiful image of redemption. And it's the same with us in our lives. When it comes to our faith, the resurrection of Jesus gives us a chance to experience redemption and forgiveness from our sin and our brokenness and the problems that we face. With Jesus, we're given unlimited chances in our lives as he doesn't keep a record of our wrongs. Jesus' resurrection covers every one of our failures and our mistakes and our insecurities. No matter what we've done, no matter who we've been, no matter what we've gotten ourselves into, no moment is too far gone to be redeemed. And Peter is a living example of that. And when we experience this redemption and forgiveness, it causes us to love God and follow him more deeply. Peter found out something very important that day. Because of Christ's resurrection, there is more to this life. What happens after Peter encounters Jesus is that Jesus asks Peter 3 different times if he loves him. And each time Peter responds with, "Yes, Lord, of course I love you. You know that I do." And he's even getting frustrated that Jesus keeps asking him this such a silly question. And each time in response to Peter, Jesus says, "Then feed my sheep. Then feed my sheep. Then feed my sheep." This is what happens around this fire. What Jesus is talking about here is that he's comparing sheep to people, specifically the church. Sheep need fed. Sheep need to be guided and directed. Sheep need to be taken care of. And this is what Jesus is talking about and asking Peter to do, to lead God's people like he's shepherding a flock of sheep. He's asking him to build the church. And just as Peter denied Jesus 3 times, in a moment that caused pain and shame, Jesus asks Peter 3 times if he loves him and if he will build his church. And that happens around a fire. And what we know is that once Jesus returns to heaven, Peter is one of the most influential leaders of the church. And if it wasn't for him, the church might not even look like it does today. So not only does Peter have this memory where he was redeemed from his failure, it's here that Jesus is calling Peter to more. Jesus doesn't just give Peter this joy of a redeeming moment around this fire, redeeming the memory of this terrible thing that happened, just to sit there and think, "Oh, that was really cool. Like, I feel really good about myself. I'm glad that I'm forgiven. Yay." No, his painful moment is redeemed so that when Jesus asked him to build his church, he wouldn't think he was out of the running or that he was disqualified for what he did earlier, but that he would believe that God was calling him to do it and that he could. Jesus had so much more in store for Peter and for his life than for him to feel beaten down and swallowed in his sorrow because of his sin. He wanted him to be set free. He wanted him to be redeemed from that painful moment that broke him earlier so that he could press on in the race that Jesus set before him. Because there was so much more for Peter's life. And there was so much more that Jesus needed Peter to do than to be upset about what happened earlier. You may have a past moment that's holding you back, or something you think that's disqualifying you about yourself for what God wants to do in your life now. And if that's you, Jesus wants you to know that there's so much more to life and so much more for your life that he has in store for you to be engulfed in that moment where you failed. through Jesus' resurrection, he redeems dark moments. He encourages us to keep going. He looks at you around that fire, or whatever that moment for you that describes failure. And he looks at you straight in the eye, and he tells you, there is more to life with me. And there are things I need you to do. I want to end by giving us a chance to respond in two different ways. First, my question for you is, do you need a situation? Do you need a sin in your life? Do you need an addiction or a pain or a memory or a moment of failure or shame to be redeemed? Maybe you're like Peter, and every time you think of a situation, whether you did something or something was done to you, it brings back pain and sorrow and burden, and you can't escape it. There is good news today. Because of what Jesus did, because what Jesus did through his death and resurrection was bring victory over sin and death, it gives us a way to be forgiven for every mistake that we've made. Because of what Christ did through his death and resurrection, the painful moments that have happened to us can be healed and restored, and the memory can be changed to God's goodness and mercy. Because of Jesus' death and resurrection, we can step into redemption. We can experience restoration. We can walk in freedom. We can be encouraged that there is more. Do you need a moment redeemed today? The second response is saying yes to Jesus for the very first time. Maybe this Jesus thing is new for you, but you feel him drawing you into a relationship with him. Maybe you've been going to church for a while and you've kind of been hesitant, but you've never really made a decision to say, yes, Jesus, I believe in you. I believe in what you've done. I want to follow you. Today's the day. Today can be the day that you do that. And I pray that it is. Because of Jesus' resurrection, painful moments can be redeemed. Because of Jesus' resurrection, there is more to this life. We pray that you experience that today on Easter. But not just today, but you walk in this resurrection power each and every